you all ready to meet a true Viking warrior? Ga-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba! Behold, historically accurate teching the Viking. Ga-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba! Yes! Many people think that Vikings fought with swords, but no, every Viking fought with Thor's hammer! Absolutely. They also wore mighty chicken hats. You know, it's a popular misconception that Viking helmets had the horns on them. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I mean, all you had to do was just grab the horns and drag them down. But actually, Vikings did not wear helmets at all. No, they wore chicken hats, and they were actually pretty effective. The Vikings were able to, they were at their peak for quite some time. And also, they used the Master Shield from The Legend of Zelda. Now back in the day, of course, they only had Legend of Zelda on the NES. They didn't have, Breath of the Wild or anything, a Skyward Sword or Ocarina, but they had to make do, okay? So yeah, that's the story of the Vikings. And also, they were fans of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Yeah, I really wish at this point I was a Minnesota Vikings fan. That would have just worked out great. Plus, I like purple. Okay, so today's video, we're going to be talking about the mighty Elbaf warriors, Dorry and Brogy. I went back and I reread Little Garden. I also rewatched it in the anime. Couple of things to reference with that as some differences and some maybe foreshadowing for later, who knows. But I think the biggest, the shocking thing in the last chapter was not even so much that Shanks was there on Elbaf, confirming that theory once and for all that Shanks has ties to Elbaf. Brogy himself even called Shanks, yes, brother, we'll go off and fight. So Shanks is definitely a friend of the Giants, okay? But even beyond Shanks, it's the fact that Dorry and Brogy are even there. Because, hey, you know what? Here's the thing. Raise your hand if you thought Dorry and Brogy were going to be dueling on Little Garden for the rest of the story, and in fact, even years and years beyond the story. Honestly, kind of me, I thought that was just going to be their thing. It's like, it's one of those things that's timeless. It's this mighty duel of these two great warriors, locked in this battle of attrition, where it's like they're both on equal keel of each other. No one can get the better of the other one, and it's just like, Brogy, we fight, Dorry, we brawl, and it's like, like over 73-something thousand ties. There was that one loss, but that doesn't really count because Mr. 3 is a douche. But anyway, yeah, and so that was 2 years ago, too, so it might be over, 80,000 duels at this point, insane. So I was, kind of expecting it would have been fine if the Straw Hats would have finished their whole adventure, and then, they might have reached Elbaf anyway, and then followed it up and went to Laugh-Tale and found the One Piece, and then, you cut to 10, 20 years later, and Dorry and Brogy are still at it, you know what I mean? 120 years of their duel, they're still at it, and that's kind of a thing that's, timeless. In and of themselves, they are sort of like a monument to the pride of the warriors of Elbaf, okay? But that was not the case. That was not the case. Dorry and Brogy are now on Elbaf, meaning their duel has ended. So that's a big thing because that duel has been going on for over a century. So the idea, in the review, I threw out the idea well, what would have happened if maybe Odin or Thor or Loki or one of the princes, I'm assuming Odin is the king of the giants, and maybe he lives on a sky castle way up on Yggdrasil, the world tree. We know Loki is one of the princes, so we're probably going to go along with Thor being the other prince. That angle of Norse mythology, not exactly accurate, but it's the one that everybody is most acquainted with, mostly because of the MCU, because Thor and Loki are brothers, and then Odin is their all-father, just look at it like that. I'm fine with that interpretation. And so maybe they got involved. Maybe they were like, we need Dorry and Brogy. We summon Dorry and Brogy back to the island. We need them now more than ever, because Oimo and Kashi went out to sea to find them about 50 years ago, got captured by the government, and the government lied to them and said that Dorry and Brogy were actually captured by the world government. This was not true, and that if you want them back, you have to basically work for us for, I think, another 50 years or something. And Oimo and Kashi were like, yeah, all right, who cares? Because giants live about 3 times as long as regular humans. The oldest giants, Yorl and Jarl, lived up to around 345 years, and if you divide that by 3, that's still around 115. So even by human standards, yeah, you can live to 115. Kureha, of course, is 140, but still, living to 115 115 years old. That's pretty impressive. And those were some of the oldest giants that were out there. So Oimo and Kashi at the time where they got captured by the government, this was around when they were around like 100 years old. So they were only about in their 30s and their early 30s. So they're like, yeah, all right, sure, we'll work for the government and guard this gate at Enies Lobby for 50 years. And so they did that. Of course, Enies Lobby arc happens. The Straw Hats in the Alliance, they barge in, and Oimo and Kashi are very upset. But it's okay because Usopp, Sage King, was there to explain to them that, hey, don't worry about it. Brogy and Dorry were not captured by the government. I met them recently, like a couple of months ago. We were at Little Garden, and we were there, and they were still dueling. And Oimo and Kashi realized that it's like, oh, okay, they're still fighting. So after the events of Enies Lobby, Oimo and Kashi go to Water 7 to just kind of have a little bit of a celebration to kind of recuperate and everything and to heal their wounds after the battle. And then they decide to depart and go back to Elbaf. And this was shown in the Where Are They Now cover series that was happening way back in like chapter 400 or something. And it says specifically in the cover page, they are going back to Elbaf. They are not trying to go to Little Garden to get Dorry and Brogy because they assumed the original reason they left to go to Little Garden was because they thought something was wrong, because dueling giants for 40, 50 years, even for giants, that's a little bit overkill. That's weird, you know? So they were thinking maybe something was wrong. So they went back to see if they were still there, okay? But now that Usopp confirmed that Dorry and Brogy were still dueling, they were like, you know what? Just leave them to it. And then they went back home to Elbaf. So when they got back to Elbaf, and keep in mind, this was still 2 years ago. This was pre-time skip when Oimo and Kashi left Water 7 and went back to Elbaf. So it probably didn't take them that long to get there. When they got there, they told everybody, probably including, I'm assuming Othin, the king of the giants, asked for an audience because Oimo and Kashi had been missing for so long. And they're like, I ask for an audience. Tell me what you've learned. And Oimo and Kashi explained to Othin and Loki and Thor or whoever, all the royalty of giant kind, that Dorry and Brogy are still brawling. They're still dueling on Little Garden. It's been a duel that's lasted 100 years. This is an epic, none of which Elbaf has ever seen before. The god of war is truly pleased. And then Kratos is up there and he's just like, I am pleased. So there you go. And maybe at that point, though, Othin was like, this is incredible, but we need them back here. The world is changing in a way that I've never seen before. So in Norse mythology, Othin has a slew of different powers. One of the things he has is he's missing an eye, and he traded his eye for wisdom. On top of that, he has a bunch of magical tchotchkes. He has this multiplying ring. He has I think Gungnir is the name of Othin's spear that like always hits its mark. It's that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if Othin in One Piece has some kind of clairvoyance ability with his like eye patch or something, and just like, I could see the world and it's changing. Or maybe not even clairvoyance like Viola's ability, but like maybe he could see the future, or he could see that he's if Madame Chiarly was good at divination and she could actually accurately predict the future through like prophecies and stuff, it's not crazy to assume there's other people out there in the world that could do the same thing that Chiarly could. Chiarly decided to destroy her crystal ball because she was done predicting the future, but that doesn't mean that other people in the world cannot predict the future just as accurately as Chiarly did. If Chiarly was able to do it, there's other people that are able to do it. So maybe Othin, the king of the giants, might be able to do that, and he's like, I can maybe not see it accurately, but I predict that some major war is going to happen soon. Maybe it is Ragnarok. Maybe it is the story of Ragnarok, the end of the world, this epic battle between gods and giants and men and like everybody. And all these like monsters come out of hell and they fight or whatever. And it's time to go. Like Jormungandr, the world serpent, finally detaches itself from its own tail, and Thor has to brawl with it. Like all that stuff's happening. What if Othin predicted that and he's like, Ragnarok is happening. We need Dorry and Brogy. So then they sent a bunch of giants because I didn't want to, they wanted to risk Oimo and Kashi getting captured again, just the two of them. So maybe they sent like a lot of giants, like Oimo and Kashi. Actually, might have been Hyrudin, because remember, Hyrudin is the captain of the new giant warrior pirates. Him with Stanson and Rode and Goldberg and Girth, who was the little girl that befriended Big Mom back in the day, back in her backstory with Elbaf and everything. So they're all their own pirate crews now that are the part of the Straw Hat that Grand Fleet. So what if they contacted Hyrudin's crew, and they're like, you need to go to Little Garden, and you need to bring back the great captains Dorry and Brogy. Tell them it's a direct order from Othin, that he has had a prophetic dream that Yggdrasil will fall, and Ragnarok is on the horizon, and you need to come back for the battle amongst all battles. Tell them that their duel has been well fought for well over a century now. They are two of the greatest warriors of all time, and now they are selected by the King of the Giants to fight in this ultimate battle, because that's what Ragnarok is, okay? So I think if you spin the story like that, I think Dorry and Brogy might finally yield and return home. If it's Ragnarok, if it's that big of a deal, the end of the world, that's something that may be more important than their individual duel, okay? Now, the only reason I say that, because you might say, well, what if one of them won? What if Dorry ended up winning? By the way, I was rooting for Dorry the whole time. Who is rooting for Dorry? Dorry gang! Yeah, the epic beard and the Terry sword. You know, yeah, suck it, Brogy fans! Dorry won that battle, and you know it! Yeah, he was the greater warrior! Yeah! You know, it's like, no, Brogy, we would do it. I love his mustache, and his beard was cool too. And he had the axe, the bruiser axe. I called it the berserker axe earlier. Sorry, no, it was the bruiser axe and the Terry sword. They were the weapons that were destroyed with the, you know, the mighty Elbaf spear he used, the warrior sovereignty. Okay, so the reason why I don't think just one of them won was because that's not how the duel was set up. That duel was set up with having an eternal pose to Elbaf. They had one eternal pose. And Dorry even said this in the Little Garden arc. When Vivi and Luffy were hanging out with Dorry, Vivi was like, Dorry, are you sure it takes a whole year for the log pose to reset on this island, on Little Garden? And he's like, yes, unfortunately. And so Luffy and Vivi are like, well, we can't stay on this island for a whole year. Is there any other way we can get off this island? Any other way? And so Dory's like, well, we do have an eternal pose to Elbaf. In a way, that's actually what me and Brogy are actually fighting over. Whoever eventually wins our duel will take that eternal pose and return home to the warland Elbaf. And Dorry actually even says to Luffy, he's like, well, I could give it, well, I wouldn't give it to you. You could try to take it to me by force. I mean, I'm a giant. That's how we do it. I love that, how even Dorry is like, I have this eternal pose. If you want it, well, you'd have to fight me for it, you know, because he's a giant. Now, Luffy immediately says, nah, I don't want it because I don't want to go to Elbaf next. We want to go to Alabasta at that point to, you know, save Vivi's kingdom and everything like that, right? So the implication is, yeah, it's like whoever wins gets to go home and gets to claim the glory of the war god Elbaf and the glory of the giants. And the loser, I guess, either stays on Little Garden or, like, wanders the sea in defeat. So the pride and honor of these giant warriors, yeah, they were best friends, but it's like, if you win, if somebody did win, like if Dorry did end up winning fair and square without any interference from any third parties, he slices down Brogy, Brogy hits the ground, I feel like the two would, like, they would weep together, and they would, like, embrace, and they would be like, Brogy, you are the greatest warrior I've ever battled. And then Brogy's like, I know, brother. Take the eternal pose. Go back to our homeland. Tell them of this great duel. And then Dorry is like, yes, I shall, in the name of Elbaf. And then I guess they would make a raft or something. Not really sure how they would get home. But Dorry would eventually, you know, go by the rules of the duel and return, and Brogy would not, because that is their warrior pride. I just don't really see in a way of just like, well, I finally beat you, Brogy, but screw it, let's both go home. You know, I don't know. It's just, that's kind of undercutting the whole point of the battle, you know what I mean, to end in that way. But it could have happened. I mean, maybe it might have happened. Maybe one day they just both woke up and they're like, you know what? I'm tired of this, Brogy. Yeah, me too. Let's just go home. All right. It's just like, that's how it ended. I doubt it was that. Okay. So a couple of things to just break down about the Little Garden art before I forget. So there was one line of dialogue that was in the anime. It was in the English dub of the anime. I'm not sure if it was in the Japanese version. That's the one version I did not watch for this. But there was a line of dialogue where in that same same conversation, I think, between Vivi and Luffy and Dorry. They were talking about, like, okay, well, we can't wait a year for the log to reset. We don't want to go to Elbaf, so your eternal pose is not going to work. Maybe we could just sail off and just leave. And then Dory's like, yeah, there was actually a guy a while ago that just left the island without the log resetting. And then Luffy's like, I wonder what happened to him. He's like, I don't know. I guess he probably reached the next island. Yeah, I'm sure. And then they laughed about it, right? So the implication there was a dude that arrived on the island a while ago that left before the log reset, and obviously Dorry and Brogy would have no idea about what happened to him. Although, keep in mind, there was also piles of human remains on the island, and Dorry and Brogy did say that most of the humans that come to this island do end up dying, either because of the dinosaurs, or disease, hunger, starvation. I guess hunger and starvation are the two things. Dehydration. And in fact, Dorry even brought up, some of them even foolishly attack Brogy and I, and then we have to kill them because they're attacking us, you know what I mean? So he mentions that it's usually common for humans to die on this island, with only a few exceptions of humans actually reaching Little Garden and then moving on to the next island after that, okay? So that was the line in the English dub, but in the manga, when I was looking at it, it's a different conversation. It's not really about Dorry specifically mentioning any one person that left the island. It's more about them having a laugh that's just like, he's like, oh, maybe you could just, all right, if you don't have the log to reset, maybe you could just sail off a Little Garden. Maybe you'll get lucky. And Luffy's like, yeah, maybe we'll get lucky. Ga ba 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 ba. And that's it. That was basically the conversation, not mentioning anyone specifically. Although, I mean, if you could say that it might have been Shanks, it could have been Roger, keep in mind that, like, there's a lot of islands in the beginning of the Grand Line. Not every single person that goes into the Grand Line is going to end up at Little Garden, so it's only if you pick a specific track and you stick with it. And in fact, probably most people would have probably gotten captured by the bounty hunters at Whiskey Peak during the time of Luffy, obviously. So maybe Shanks picked the same route, maybe Roger picked the same route, who knows, and they might have met Dorry and Brogy at some point. Definitely Shanks met Dorry and Brogy before. I think they met each other well before they were at the bar in the last chapter, all right? So I like to think that Shanks did arrive on Little Garden, did get to see the epic duel, and then he just moved on after that, right? At the beginning of Shanks' own adventure on the Grand Line, right? Then there's the scene at the end of Little Garden when Dorry and Brogy use their weapons to form Hakako, I think it was called, the warrior sovereignty, the warrior spear of Elbaf. And that's an interesting scene because they both take their weapons and they sort of charge up, and it's way more apparent in the anime. In the manga, not so much, but in the anime, they have like an aura coming off of them. So those of you that are saying that aura is just something that was added in the Wano arc of the anime, no, this aura was around for a while. It's a little bit overdrive right now, but you know what I mean. So Dorry has blue aura because he's the blue ogre, and Brogy has red aura because he's the red ogre. And they use their weapons, and they charge up their aura, and they launch this ultimate shockwave that strikes the Island Eater, this giant goldfish, as the Going Merry has sailed into it, blasts a hole straight through, cuts a whole section out of this goldfish, and then the Going Merry goes flying out, and perfectly fine, by the way, lands, and they keep going straight to the next island, all right? This attack destroys Dorry and Brogy's weapons, the Terry Sword and the Bruiser Axe that they have used to duel for over 100 years, and then they just continue their duel with fisticuffs, and we see that in a cover story later on, post-time skip. They are still on the island, and they are still brawling just like always, okay? So I like to think that moment where they use the Elbaf sovereignty is actually hockey, because it really doesn't make any sense for these two great giant warriors in the prime of their fighting ability, keep in mind, to not know at least armament hockey, okay? I would imagine pretty much every giant knows armament hockey. I mean, God, maybe Odin has like some really cool high-spec observation, like future sight. Maybe honestly, that is what Charlie had, like observation hockey beyond anything else, like a rare mutation or something like that, where it's literally prophetic dreams or visions of the future, okay? So, yeah, now I think it is hockey, because also keep in mind, like, they charge up their attacks, they use them, and also, when this shockwave hits the goldfish, it like goes right through it, and it always bugged me that did not destroy the Mary, because like the Mary got swallowed by the fish here, and then like Hakako, boom, and then like it's like the shockwave went around the Mary, like Dorry and Brogy were specifically aiming to not harm the Mary but destroy the fish, and so I feel like that's only feasible if you are really high spec in armament, or in fact Conquerors. Now Conquerors hockey might have been established earlier on with like Shanks and the Sea King, so maybe Oda had an idea that there was going to be this concept of hockey, but he didn't really nail down how it was going to appear yet in the story. You know, the stuff with like the Black Blades and well, I guess the Black Blades like with Mihawk, but like the Black Lightning and stuff, that kind of stuff with hockey didn't really come about until later, okay? And so Oda just depicted them as like this really strong attack, but it's like, dude, that was a hockey-fueled thrust. That was hockey, probably easily armament, possibly Conquerors, okay? And so, yeah, Dorry and Brogy are the greatest warriors ever. They've been fighting for 100 years. Of course they would know hockey. Of course they're Conquerors. They're Dorry and Brogy, okay? When they arrived back at Elbaf, when we saw them in the last chapter, we saw them with new weapons. We saw Brogy with a new axe that's like a double-bladed axe. His old axe, the Bruiser axe, only had like one blade on it. So this has like two-bladed double axe. And then Dorry also has a sword again. So I'm assuming these are pretty decent weapons. Also, keep in mind, the weapons were destroyed when they used that technique. That was a weakened form of the technique, probably because they were damaged weapons. But now, if they were to use that technique again after they've rested up and now they have brand spanking new weapons, that attack is probably way more devastating than it was when it was used against the Island Eater, and it was already strong enough to destroy that thing, and it was literally a thing. It was a fish that eats islands, and they were able to one-shot that thing, no problem, okay? So, yeah, big deal there, big deal. So they're back on the island now. I mentioned in the review that they probably have not been keeping up with current events. I was in a live stream with Parvision yesterday. Make sure to go check that out. I'll leave a card up there because we had a lot of crazy discussions with that. A lot of theories in One Piece that are wild, but I really love them, okay? So while we were in that live stream, we brought up kind of a funny moment where it's like, I don't think Dorry and Brogy have been keeping up with the news, and Parvision is like, well, yeah, because the newspaper is probably so small they won't be able to read it. We see it in the cover page. They're brawling, and we see a news coup drop in the paper, but I don't know if that implies that Dorry and Brogy have actually been reading the paper, like, oh wow, Luffy defeated one of the Yonko. They're keeping up to date with like current events. I don't really think they have been. They probably haven't been keeping up with any current events. And also, there's stuff that isn't even printed in the paper. So everything from after they started dueling to some of the giant warrior pirates being captured and, you know, executed at Marineford, and then Mother Caramel shows up to stop the execution, and then the whole thing with the Lamb's house, and then Charlotte Linlin arriving at the island, killing Lord Fallbeard, and then the whole thing with the giants witnessing big, like, their hatred for her, the birth of Loki, you know, like, Dorry and Brogy would have no knowledge of any of this until they returned to the island, or until somebody showed up and told them about it, right? So even like giants like Hyrudine is only 81 years old, which is like in his late 20s for giants, and yeah, he was born well after Dorry and Brogy began their duel, so they would have no idea who Hyrudine or Stanson or Gerd or Rode or Goldberg or anybody that shows up to like bring them back, if they really were. They would have no idea who those people were. Dorry and Brogy would have no idea who Whitebeard, Garp, Sengoku, Roger, Rox, well, Shanks, because they met him, but like other than that, they would not know these people personally in the story. They might not even know that like Roger had this great treasure called the One Piece and he was king of the pirates. They've been too busy fighting for the last century, so somebody would have to bring them up to speed on all this, so they might know about all that crap now, but like, you know, during the duel, I think they were really in the dark there. There was something else that was brought up in that stream with Parvision. I think one of the people in the chat mentioned it. And this was great because, you know, I'm trying to rack my brain here on how this fight between Kid and Shanks is going to go down. And I made a video about that a couple days ago. But I'm thinking like, oh, man, you know, there's no way Kid's winning, right? There's just no way that's happening. So Kid's not winning. But I also don't want Kid to straight up die. I don't want Shanks to just annihilate his crew and he's just gone out of the series forever. I know some people would probably want that, but I don't. So I'm like, there has to be something, some kind of interruption that has to occur during this battle. Something has to happen to like break them up. And one person in the chat was like, well, wait a second, Eustace Kid took part in getting rid of Big Mom, who is the greatest enemy of the giants for a multitude of different reasons. So, you know, me and Parvision were like, whoa, wait a second, that makes perfect sense. I love that. So I'm going to go along with that because, yeah, getting giants to, like, I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue on Elbaf. I'm sure they have some way of getting the news. Maybe that's Othin's job. Maybe Othin seeing the future is how the giants learn about the news all over the world. Also, it would make sense because I don't think that Elbaf is allied with the world government. They don't contribute in the Heavenly Tribute or anything like that. Contribute to the tribute. No, they do not. So they have to have some other way of probably figuring out the news beyond just like the newspaper itself. Also, Morgan's, he lies. He's sensationalist. He's all about that. We know that very clearly from the most recent chapters. So maybe relying on Othin's ability, maybe if he could see the future or something, or there's somebody on Elbaf that can see the world in like his clairvoyant way, divination, something like that. That way they would know all about what's going on in the world, and they would know the truth of it too. They would be completely away. They would not be obfuscated by Morgan's distorted lens of the world through the World Economic Times. That was a very philosophical sentence. Morgan's obfuscation of the entire world. It's like that's Morgan's ability, right? So no, if they had some ability beyond that, like Shiarli, then they would be like, oh, we know exactly what's going on in the world right now, okay? We know the real stuff that's happening, okay? They might even have access to information of maybe not specifics, but like what's happening at Marijois right now. Like they might know about Eam. Who knows, right? Or maybe at least Othin might, okay? So they would find out that Kid and Law participated in the takedown of Big Mom. Dropped her and they're like, hey, wait a second, don't hurt me. I dropped Big Mom into a volcano. All the giants are like, yeah! Somebody finally did it! And so in that case, Shanks might actually stand down, or maybe Dorry and Brogy. Well, maybe not Dorry and Brogy because they weren't there for everything that happened. But I'm assuming, by the way, Yorl and Jarl, Mountainbeard and Fallbeard were the ones that were the previous captains of the giant warrior pirates before Dorry and Brogy. Keep in mind, when Dorry and Brogy first went out to sea and they made a name for themselves and they both had their 100 million berry bounty and they landed on Little Garden, they were only around 60 years old. They were younger than what Hyrudine is right now. And they were probably only around 20 years old if you just divide that by 3. They're 160 right now. So they were really, it was kind of crazy when you think about it that the giant warrior pirates were considered by humans to be like the most horrible, rampaging pirate crew ever, that no one could stand up to their might. And from the perspective of giant kind, from the ages that, they were only around 20 years old, from the perspective of the rest of the giants, Dorry and Brogy and the giant warrior pirates were pretty much just a bunch of young punks, ruffians that were just causing some upheaval, causing some ruckus in the world. And to giants, that's what they were. To the rest of humanity, they were like, oh my God, the giant warrior pirates, they're a might that cannot be stopped. What can we do? And then that's when the duel happened and they broke up. Okay. So, yeah, if you look at it from that perspective, though, Dorry and Brogy might have been trained by Yorl and Jarl growing up, and then when they get back, they find out that Lord Fallbeard was, they're probably both dead by now because, Jarl Beard, he was 345 years old 60 years ago, so he would be well over, he'd be right around 400 years old right now, which is, I think, a little bit too old for a giant, so he is probably most likely dead right now. So he probably died peacefully, but Fallbeard was murdered by Charlotte Linlin, okay, in a Semla-fueled rage. And also, a mighty giant warrior that has probably fought thousands, maybe tens of thousands of battles, Lord Fallbeard, this great warrior that had been revered by giant kind for 3 centuries, was killed by a 5-year-old girl wearing a polka-dotted muumuu, basically. That's probably the greatest dishonor to a warrior, and that's probably adds and contributes fuel to the fire on why the giants just outright despise Charlotte Linlin. Okay, so even if Dorry and Brogy were not there for that, even if they did not hear the news, when they get back and they hear that story, they are probably enraged at Big Mom. And Oimo and Kashi would know full well. I mean, Oimo and Kashi were there when this happened. They saw Big Mom kill Lord Fallbeard, okay? So, yeah, Oimo and Kashi are there right now. They might be like, Dorry, Brogy, Shanks, stand down. That's the man that killed Big Mom. and then killed Charlotte Linland, finally ended the last great blight on giant kind. You know what I mean? And so that, yeah, that might actually sway in kids' favor. Now, I don't think that's going to do anything like the Giants are all going to fight on kids' side now against Shanks or anything like that. Like a giant civil war. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think it's certainly going to save him from getting killed by Kid. I mean, Kid getting killed by Shanks. And then we'll see where it goes from there, okay? And then the Strahds still need to arrive and everything like that. They still need to get there, and you know, Usopp needs to be reunited with Dorry and Brogy and everything, and there's still a lot of stuff going on with that. But, yeah, that was really just the video there. I just really wanted to discuss Dorry and Brogy's story, how it would be possible that they could have ended their duel, and where we could be at right now in the story moving forward. You know what? I don't really have snake facts for you, but I can talk about Jormungandr. So let's do that. We'll do snake facts. Jormungandr. All right, Jormungandr is the great world serpent, or the Midgard serpent in Norse mythology, okay? So the idea is you have the entire world, and then you have this huge serpent that's an Ouroboros. It's the snake ever consuming its own tail, and that's kind of at the perimeter of the world. Like, if you just sailed out far enough in Norse mythology, you would eventually end up this unfathomably large serpent that's encircling the entire globe, okay? And Jormungandr is a child of Loki, alongside Fenrir and Hel, Hel, who's also shares the name with the particular region of Hel in Norse mythology. So this makes things a little bit more odd when you look at, like, for example, the MCU, where you have in Thor 3, Ragnarok, you have Hel, who is the sister of Loki and Thor in the movie, but in actual Norse mythology, Hel is Loki's daughter. So you get some problems there. But anyway, yeah, Jormungandr is one of Loki's children. Othin kind of takes all of Loki's children and puts them into different locations. Othin pretty much picks up Jormungandr and throws him into the ocean, where he becomes the Ouroboros. When Jormungandr releases his own tail, when he finally, like, releases his own tail and he ceases to be an Ouroboros, that is what summons Ragnarok. That is one of the calls. That, along with, like, Heimdall's horn, is the calling of Ragnarok, the end of days, this great war of the gods and the giants and everything. Something else is that in Norse mythology, Thor is essentially the greatest rival of Jormungandr, and vice versa. There is one story where Thor goes fishing with another giant, and the giant has this, like, ox with him, and Thor's like, "Hey, friend, give me some bait." And the one giant's like, "No, I'm not giving you bait." And so Thor literally takes his, I don't know if it's Mjolnir or if it's an axe or something, and he slices off this giant ox's head. Just slices off this ox's head, and he's like, "All right, I'll use this as my bait." And then he, like, you know, takes the giant fishing hook and throws it on the line and just chucks it out into the great ocean on the perimeter of the world, and he fishes up Jormungandr, and Thor and Jormungandr have this big brawl in the ocean. Some stories have him completely slaying Jormungandr with Mjolnir, and other times it's like Jormungandr spraying poison and everything. So they're basically rivals. And when Ragnarok occurs, like in the prophecy of Ragnarok, it's basically laid out like who will fight who. Like, this god will fight this monster or this giant or something. And in the case with Ragnarok, Thor's opponent is to be Jormungandr, and they are supposed to kill each other in that battle, and then that's how that's supposed to go. So anyway, that's snake facts today, Jormungandr. Thanks for watching, everybody. This will be Techie signing out later. Now you can see why I was wearing the hat the entire video.